So thank you very much. It sounds like everyone can hear us. I also wanted to remind everyone that you can submit questions for David in the chat box on the right side of your screen throughout the presentation. And if you're on Twitter, you can also submit questions using the hashtag BPN911. We'll address as many of your questions as possible at the end of the presentation. And without further delay, I'm going to turn it over to David.
Well, good morning or good afternoon, depending upon where you happen to be today. I wanted to, first of all, thank VolunteerMatch for hosting this important and meaningful webinar, and also thank all of you that have agreed to dedicate some time this morning to learning about this. So you've already all done your good deed for the day. But what's nice about 9/11 is you can do good deeds early and often. It's not like voting. So you can do many, many good deeds. So I wanted to first introduce myself. I'm the president and co-founder of MyGoodDeed, which is a charity, a 501c3 charity that was created shortly after the 9/11 attacks with the goal of establishing September 11th as a National Day of Service and Remembrance, both generally and also under federal law. I co-founded the group with a good friend of mine, Jay Winuk, who had lost his brother Glenn in the collapse of the World Trade Center South Tower. And Jay and I, along with quite a number of other family members, got together shortly thereafter to talk about how we could give meaning to the loss of so many lives. I think the greatest fear that the 9/11 community had would be that as time would go by, people would forget, that they would sweep this particular tragedy under the historic carpet, so to speak, as you'd expect a nation to do that. The world moves on, and there was great anxiety that 10 or 5, 10, 15, or 50 years from now, that there would be very little good that ever came from the tragedy and the attacks. And so the families came together to support the idea of observing 9/11 as a day of doing good deeds and of charitable service. However, any one particular person or organization decided it wanted to define that. It was a very beautiful idea that was inspired in great measure by the way the country came together shortly after the 9/11 attacks. If you remember, we were all unified at that time. The magnitude of that tragedy dissolved our differences as people. We weren't red states or blue states any longer. It didn't really matter who you are or what might made you different compared to your neighbor next to you. All of a sudden, we were all one. We all shared this common bond, our collective both outrage and just dismay over the horror of that terrible tragedy and the damage that it inflicted not just upon the victims and their families, but upon, I think, all of humanity. And in a very unique and historic way, we and even many other people throughout the world became, were bonded because in so many ways we were all victims. Regardless of whether you lost someone or not, I think we all felt that we lost something. And I remember I was in California at the time. I grew up in New York City and was born and raised there, and that's where I met Jay and other friends of mine who were affected by the attacks. But I had moved to California, and I still, like probably many of you, remember exactly where I was the very moment that someone called me and said, turn on your television set, and what it felt like, to watch those buildings come down. It was a complete disbelief. And then to see the horror of it, to actually be able to witness on television what was happening in such an intimate, personal, and difficult way. I, of course, know people who were actually there. My own brother was across the street, and, he witnessed people who were jumping literally out of these buildings. And it was one of to this day, it took him it took him 8 years before he would come out and even participate in our service project because of the significance and magnitude of that moment. And so when you think about the horror of that, the families and the 9/11 community felt that something equally good had to come from that tragedy, that the entire universe had been sort of knocked out of whack, that there was an imbalance where evil had prevailed so prominently in this terrible way, and that we had to do something equally as good. And really that's what happened. We were inspired by the way in which the country came together, that spirit of unity, and we all felt that we couldn't come up with a better way to pay tribute and to those that were lost and survivors and the many that rose in service than to encourage the country to step out of itself, selves, or all of us step out of ourselves as individuals, and annually observe this day in the same way in which we observed a few days right after 9/11, so that we would rekindle the spirit of unity. We'd put aside our differences. We would not worry about competitive concerns between companies. We would all join together, and we would help others in need, and that would ultimately become the legacy for 9/11. That was the goal. And, we started down a very long pathway to try to make that happen. It was a very significant effort. In the early days, we had I think we raised about $1,500 for our first website, and, thanks to friends and others, and we just encouraged people to post their good deeds for the day. And as the years went on, it began to gain grassroots momentum. And by the time we had gotten to the 5th anniversary of 9/11 in 2006, we had accomplished some important things. We had about 250,000 people that had already come to our website and posted good deeds, and not just from the New York or Washington, D.C. areas, but from all 50 states and 165 different countries. A lot of people forget that 9/11 was a tragedy that didn't just impact Americans. Individuals from 93 different countries were killed on that day, including from India and Saudi Arabia and the UK and Japan and so many other places. And so that, but even beyond that, I think the reason that the world sort of came to our moral aid was that they saw this as not just an attack on Americans, but an attack against all of humanity. So once the 5th anniversary took place, we then started working very aggressively to try to establish September 11th as the National Day of Service and Remembrance under federal law, and we accomplished that in 2009, thanks to the tremendous efforts of 9/11 families, rescue and recovery workers, iron workers and their unions, national service leaders, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and so many other groups. There was a general consensus that this was a good idea, and we were able to include in the Serve America Act a provision that recognized 9/11 as a day of service and remembrance officially for the first time. That was passed and signed into law by President Barack Obama in 2009, about April or May, I think, of 2009, and then on September the 11th, 2009, he officially proclaimed it a National Day of Service and Remembrance under presidential proclamation, which is something that only the president can do. And so 9/11 is only the second day that has been designated as a day of service and remembrance under federal law, the other, of course, being Martin Luther King Day. The distinction with us, of course, is that we're not a holiday. We're not interested in ever being a holiday. We do not want this to ever be a paid day off. We want this to be a day when people do this voluntarily out of the goodness of their hearts, regardless of whether it's a work day or not. So I wanted to kind of make sure that I had properly sort of articulated sort of the vision for the day and what's happening. You can see on the screen here that I've just brought up some information in just terms of how to type your questions into the box, and then how you can submit your thoughts to Twitter. And so as Casey mentioned, I'll be happy to take your questions to the degree that we have time at the end, and I'll do my very best to leave lots of opportunity for that. So I think I shared with you, in essence, the history of it. This is our mission statement, and there's something important about this, which is that this is not just about honoring the victims, but also the survivors and the many that rose in service in response to the attacks. People say, well, why is service your idea here? And there are two reasons. The first, of course, as I mentioned earlier, is that we were inspired by sort of this remarkable spirit of service that existed throughout the nation right after the attacks. And in fact, volunteering nationwide increased for about 3 years straight for the first time since 1979 after the 9/11 attacks. That it had that significant an impact in our American culture. It reversed what was at that time essentially nearly a 3-decade decline in volunteering on a registered sort of affiliated basis. So it really had a major impact. So we wanted to acknowledge that. But we also wanted to make sure that we didn't just honor those that were lost or injured, but the people that dug through the dirt and the rubble without regard to their own personal safety, as well as the many that subsequently joined the military or were already in the military that have gone overseas to protect us, and also public safety officers that do that every day here. And we forget about the first responders and others, but you may not know that more than 900 of them that were exposed to the toxins of Ground Zero have died since the attacks, 10% of them having committed suicide. So this is a serious day. I mean, that's the point. And this isn't just a day of service. This is a day of service in remembrance of. It's very different than, say, any other day of service that you might have been involved with before because of this unique characteristic. It is just a unique kind of experience, and as a result, it's so important and valuable that we all participate. For me, I've never felt that this is an option. I've always felt that if we all really remembered how we felt on 9/11, there would be no question that we would find some way to support this day, however we might all decide to do that. So I thought it would be valuable just to talk a little bit about some of the things that you could do and give you a little more detail on sort of the goals and what we're planning. So I'm going to kind of pop up the 3 key goals that we have this year. The first, of course, is to create this constructive and positive legacy, that forever honors the victims and those that rose in service. And we all realize that the country would, of course, forget long term if it didn't have something positive to do. We had to create a ritual around this day. It couldn't just be remembrance because people do forget. And it's not fair to say to the country, you must remember the 9/11 victims forever, because there's lots of tragedies that happen in the world, and we have to move on from them. I mean, we just do. I mean, there have been other natural disasters that, of course, have taken many, many more lives than what happened on 9/11. So we wanted to make sure there was just something positive. Certainly for the 10-year anniversary of 9/11, our goal is to document a minimum of 1 million commitments to serve, and we're going to well blow by that. I mean, we are having huge traffic on our website already, even in August, and our hope is that ultimately we'll engage millions of people in some form of charitable activity, whatever it is that they decide they want that to be, and both affiliated and unaffiliated. And you probably know the distinction, but affiliated would be service where you're working through an organization like a nonprofit or a school or a faith group, or with your employer, or self-directed or unaffiliated service where you just go off and do something yourself that is not necessarily quote-unquote counted. I don't like to call it unaffiliated because it sounds like that's a negative, when in fact the vast majority of Americans today participate in that independent or self-directed form of service. So 9/11 is not just a day of volunteering. It is a day when you can perform a good deed. For example, many, many years, we always have lots of children that say they're going to make their bed for the day or they're going to clean the house. I checked to see if any of them are my own children. Apparently not. So I'm going to work real hard on that this year. But the point is that this is a day when we just help one another. We show compassion. We quit worrying about our differences. We do good things. And we need that anyway. I mean, regardless of 9/11, we've always needed a day like that. But I think especially because of 9/11, it's a wonderful way in which we can pay tribute and make sure that something good comes from that tragedy. And you can all make that happen. I mean, each and every one of you are now officially been deputized as our ambassadors for this good work. And you might encounter barriers within your organization to do something around this day. Oh, we can't do a service project, or we already have a global volunteerism day in May, and we can't interfere with that. But that doesn't mean that there aren't 1,000 other ways in which you can support this day. The least of which could be just simply sending emails around to your employees and then to your colleagues and friends, encouraging them to support this and to post their own personal service tributes. It doesn't require that you do things yourself. You know, we want to make sure that we're not just talking about 9/11 here this year. We're talking about doing this every year. So the whole campaign is not going away. You know, we'll be back talking to you next year and the year after that. And things may be different than the 10-year anniversary. I mean, we already know there are thousands of companies that are participating in this year. But we hope that each year they'll see it as an opportunity to continue to pay tribute, that our sort of obligation to remember does not end on the 10-year anniversary of 9/11. So I wanted to kind of talk about that. So these are some of the program partners that are helping to lead the effort, including VolunteerMatch. So MyGoodDeed, our organization, and Hands-On Network are the co-leaders of the effort this year. Hands-On is the lead activation partner, so they're responsible for helping to mobilize the entire nonprofit community, provide training, organize service events around the country. We have more than 24 major events that we're planning ourselves, involving thousands and thousands of volunteers in communities across the nation. And then in addition to their networks and their affiliates around the nation, they are activating and facilitating many other activities as well. So it's a substantial effort on their part. And then, of course, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the 9/11 Memorial. The Mission Continues, which is, you know, military support organization that provides assistance to veterans and current personnel, both in terms of re-engaging them in the workplace and involving them in service. Of course, you know the others, AARP, Corporation for National Community Service, the United Way, and many, many others. So we have more than 100 partners that are very prominent in terms of their size and scope, each of which are activating their own people. And there are many others that we don't even know about. I mean, this is very much an organic observance, so there'll be a substantial portion of activities that we may never hear a thing about. A couple of important statistics that are worth sharing with you. We did some research coming into this year, and what we found out was that nearly 70% of all Americans, when surveyed, said that they were interested in observing the day through some form of service. They want to pay tribute. So that means that a large percentage of the people in all of your organizations are looking for things to do. This is a very unique thing. In contrast to other days of service that may be difficult to recruit for, 9/11 is an observance where many people already want to do something. So whether you can, you know, accommodate that this year or not, you know, you should be thinking long-term about the opportunity for 9/11 to be an important part of your charitable calendar, whether that's, again, a service project or your United Way program, when to kick that off, or Days of Caring, or other kinds of initiatives. The fall period can be very meaningful for you. And it doesn't have to be specifically on 9/11, which I'll talk about in a minute. I mean, many companies are starting you know, what they call a kind of a season of service, where they begin on around the 11th and they bookend it with Make a Difference Day. So again, it's just all about each organization coming up with their own thoughts. We surveyed our participants every year, and almost, you know, uniformly, each year we find out that 60% of the people involved describe themselves as new or relatively new to volunteering. Well, that's a pretty powerful statistic. Basically, what that says is that you ran a service project and you surveyed your people, and 60 or more said that they were new to volunteering. You'd probably be pretty happy about that, because it indicated that you were drawing new people into the fold, you know, not the usual suspects. I mean, the challenge for the national service community is breaking through to the mainstream American. You know, there's two sort of groups. One is the cause activists, which are the 17% of Americans that typically engage in affiliated service, and then there is everybody else that would be defined as cause-minded, and then there's some people that just aren't, you know, they don't care. But there's a gigantic, you know, audience of cause-minded individuals that are interested in participating, but under new rules, you know, under things that we don't think about. You know, there's a whole different presentation just about the cause-minded community and what they're looking to do these days. And in particular, of course, as you all know, this is fueled by the millennials that are coming in that are twice as interested in getting involved in service as any other prior generation at this time in their age. And you know, these are internet people, so they're looking at this differently. They want things where they have more choice, when things are more immediate for them. The traditional brick and mortar way of getting involved in service does not always apply to them. And so the 9/11 observance, as you know, has got a lot of elements of it that are about self-directed web-based engagement, where you don't necessarily have to get out and volunteer in the traditional way. And to me, having been involved in this for now a decade, that couldn't be a more effective sort of point of entry for many of your people. The chance to come in, you know, participate in something like this, and then the question is, what do you do next? I mean, how do you leverage that? How do you capture and cultivate that interest over time so that ultimately you might be able to bridge them over from doing something that might be a little more self-directed oriented into something that is much more on the, you know, on the ground, feet on the ground type of program. So I just wanted to kind of point out that there are some important statistical considerations that warrant your participation and present lots of opportunity. In terms of what are we doing? So I think this will give you the big picture for a minute. So as I mentioned, we're going to have large-scale volunteer service projects in major cities, 24 of them to be exact. I'll provide the volunteer match, and they can forward to you the complete list. And of course, this includes New York, Boston, Washington, as well as San Francisco, Los Angeles, Houston, St. Louis, and many, many others. And then, as I mentioned, Hands-On has affiliates in over 200 communities. And although we are not specifically, say, running a project there, many of those affiliates are running projects and have reached out to and secured their own private funders to make these projects happen. Hands-On Atlanta is a great illustration of that, where they have a big 9/11 initiative underway this year. They're not a project area that we're specifically managing. We're giving them toolkits and resources, but they went out and they got Home Depot and others to help support the program there. And so many of the other affiliates in local markets are looking for local sponsors and supporters right now, where the price to participate is probably relatively small, and yet there could be big bang for the buck, and they're still looking. So I would simply say that if you're interested in getting involved and want to support a project locally, contact your local Hands-On affiliate or your United Way affiliate and see what's going on, see if they've got something that they're looking to do but need some help. We have some amazing partnerships beyond the sort of nonprofit organizations. We sort of depend upon the kindness of strangers, to borrow a streetcar room desire line. But what we do, we would not be able to get the word out without the support of a lot of terrific organizations that have been giving us sort of the ability to reach individuals and organizations. And a lot of this is kicking in right now, this week, next week, and of course the week of 9/11 itself that begins around, I think, the 3rd or the 4th. So Clear Channel, their radio network is providing us with 76,000 PSAs over a span of about 2.5 weeks. The NFL is running our PSAs in many stadiums around the country. They're also wearing 9/11 game-worn jerseys that will then be auctioned, actually to benefit our charity and some other 9/11 charities. NASCAR they've actually produced their own PSA, which they'll be running on many of their sort of controlled stations, as well as broadcasting on ABC and ESPN in some of their races. We're also hoping that they will wrap their pace car on 9/10 in Richmond with our sort of brand identity, which is called I Will. I'll get to that in a minute. Viacom, of course, same thing across all of their main channels. Everybody from MTV to Comedy Central will be running our PSAs in their own and doing many other things. And even, GGP, which is a mall, has got signage everywhere. Neiman Marcus, same thing. They put signage in all of their stores. Best Buy is running our PSAs in many of their stores. Even the Body Shop, which is like the place we can get lotions and stuff, many of their associates are wearing the I Will button. So there's so many things happening. We also are sending out lesson plans to more than 1 million teachers beginning next week. which provide information to help them teach 9/11 in a constructive way so that classes are able to essentially adopt a charity for the day or come up with some other good deed in addition to learning about it. And so we have a lot of age-appropriate materials there. They'll be available both on the Scholastic landing page that we have, which is scholastic.com, I think, /911day, and on our own website beginning in about another week as well, which is 911day.org. Now, we've already signed up more than 1,000 businesses that we know of, both with the help of the U.S. Chamber and hands-on. And it's really interesting and amazing all the different things that they're doing. You know, it's not one thing. I would typically say that, you know, most of them are supporting causes that they already support today. We're not telling them they need to go in some new direction. You know, this isn't about asking an organization that promotes, say, a breast cancer awareness to suddenly do a military care package program. It's not like that. You can pick anything that matters to you as an organization, just like an individual can. So AXA, Ritz-Carlton, Boston Scientific, Microsoft, they all have so many different things going on. Boston Scientific's creating science kits that are going to be donated to schools in need. Microsoft has organized more than 200 different service projects, you know, in partnership with the United Way in the greater Seattle area. You know, and even smaller organizations like the Ritz-Carlton Hotel, specifically in Virginia, they're hosting a breakfast for first responders in Arlington. You know, it's just a real mix. And GlaxoSmithKline, which is one of our national funders, they're creating care packages to support Somalia family relief. And Shane's also one of our supporters. They have a number of things going on. In many of the branches, they've actually created a digital sort of bulletin board that encourages people to support the 9/11 Day campaign. But they also invited thousands of their employees to help draft and send cards to troops overseas in partnership with Blue Star families. So you kind of get the idea. I mean, it's really whatever anybody wants to do. And of course, you know, your first stop is probably to be talking to the current organizations that you already support today. Many of you, I'm sure, are very sophisticated about this, more so than I am. So I won't profess to tell you how to run a service project. I will, however, give you a little more information about the tribute campaign and what your employees and others will be experiencing and seeing, and why it's so important, I think, for your company to at least show that you're supporting it, just because you want to be responsive to their interests. Even if, again, you're not running a project yourself, you're just simply, say, directing them to our website, encouraging them to do their own thing. You can all say that. You can all say you're supporting the 9/11 Day observance this year and encourage them to take action as individuals, if that's all you can do. So we are launching this 20 million public service campaign. It actually broke last week. We've had some really compelling public service spots. If you want to see them, then probably the easiest way is to go to YouTube and just type in 9/11 Day of Service. So our YouTube channel is, you know, youtube.com/9/11 Day, 911 Day of Service, and you should find them. And there's a series of them there, everything from a 90 to a 15-second spot. I'll get to those in a minute. It's very inspiring. And it's really all about encouraging people to go online and post their tributes or their pledges to dedicate some time on 9/11 to some form of charitable service. But that's not just, you know, you as an individual. That can be your organization posting what your plans are. And we are using both the website and a very powerful custom Facebook page to gather all of these tributes, which is then sort of creating what we're calling the digital quilt, which are the images of all of these individuals and organizations that are supporting this day. So it's very exciting and really unique and different. And what's great about it is that people can, you know, they can go to the website, they can actually dedicate their specific activity to a 9/11 victim or victims by name for the first time. So it isn't just service, it's service and remembrance. And then all of those digital quilts are searchable. Those patches in the quilt are searchable, so that if I'm a family member, I could type in the name of my lost loved one. I could pull up all of the patches, as we're calling them, that represent the charitable commitments that people are making in honor of that lost loved one. It's just a really great thing. And of course, that idea came from our family members themselves on our board. Besides that, the website also provides individuals with opportunities to find volunteer opportunities, as you might imagine, as well as support and adopt charitable causes for the day. So, of course, VolunteerMatch is one of our key partners in powering our volunteer search engine, and in collaboration with Hands-On Connect, we've created one giant database that includes basically every search engine resource all in one. So if your people use our search tool, if there's a 9/11 project that's been registered by pretty much anybody into almost anything, it's going to show up on our site, which is pretty exciting. And for those of you that may be nonprofits, you can certainly register your project right now if you want. If it's partially open to the public or fully open to the public, go to VolunteerMatch if you have an account, or don't. Open one up and register your project, or you can come to our site and register your project, on our site as well. So there's a lot of different ways you can do it. The charitable cause feature is interesting because if the person doesn't want to volunteer, but they just want to pick a charity that they want to adopt for 9/11, they can search for any 501c3 charity in the nation through our resource, which we custom built with GuideStar. And then they can choose a variety of different ways to quote-unquote support it. They don't have to make a donation. They can just simply send an email requesting more information. If that organization is registered a volunteer opportunity, it'll show up on their page when they get to that particular cause. They can even just tweet about it. So there's lots of different ways in which we are giving people a choice. Now, we didn't just make that stuff up. We spent a year researching people, and we had a pretty good idea of what was of interest to them. And one of the things we learned was, give me a choice. If all you're saying is that my only option is to volunteer, only about 17% will respond favorably to that offer. If you say to me that you're giving me lots of other options and it's a little bit more of a buffet of choices, then you're going to get 60 to 70% saying this is something I'm interested in doing. Now, from the standpoint of the 9/11 families, one of the key goals was that the 9/11 observance had to be entirely inclusive. We could not exclude anybody because of the call to action. So that's why we don't say this is just a day of volunteering, because if we did that, then we'd leave out a lot of people in the country, and that would be unfair because we were all victims. Everyone has to be able to participate. So the celebrity campaign is kind of cool. I mean, what's interesting about this is, yeah, we've got 30 big celebrities in it, but it's not that, that's exciting. It's the fact that they are mixed in with everybody else. Some family members, some people off the street. We spent all summer going out around the country, from Los Angeles and Nashville to New York, taking people and asking them what they will do in observance of 9/11. And so we position the celebrities like everyone else. They don't get to be too fancy in this PSA, which of course is meaningful because that was the way it was after 9/11. It didn't matter whether you were Robert De Niro or somebody else. We were all the same, And so that's what this campaign's about. You may have seen it in a few places. It just asks, what will you do in tribute on 9/11? If you haven't, you probably will. For those of you that watch So You Think You Can Dance, you might have seen it in the season finale on the 11th of August. We debuted it there. It's since been on many, many other shows. We have countless networks that are supporting this, everybody from Fox, ABC, NBC, and so many others. So it will increasingly be in many, many places around the country. And again, you can check them out. I think they're very inspirational. You can download them. You can show them. They're all license-free. So feel free to do whatever you think makes sense to help build awareness and encourage people to see them as well. This is just a quick look at the website, which you can, of course, go to live. I'm not going to try to do that right now, but 911day.org is where you can post tributes. You can view the tribute quilt. We're still doing a little bit of final tweaking development on it, but it's a really amazing thing, and it's quite inspirational to read all the different things that people are planning to do for 9/11. I think since we launched this on around the 14th of July, we've already had 35,000 tributes posted in there. So it's a fast-moving thing. This is our Facebook page. Again, it's all kind of a custom application so that people can actually post a tribute in Facebook. It feeds right into our website. It creates, the patches into the digital quilt that we're preparing. And then American Express has created an additional app, which is on their site, but also on ours, that allows people to actually search for and sign up for a number of the key 9/11 volunteer projects that we have listed in our database, which is a great thing. So just quickly, I thought I'd touch on some of the things that we've learned over the last 7, 8 years in working with companies about this day and in answering some of their questions. So a couple of things. First, don't be afraid to participate. It's so funny, even to this day. I don't want to say it's funny, but many companies, of course, for many years, had no interest in being involved in 9/11 at all. They didn't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole because it's obviously a tragedy. Since when does anybody, quote-unquote, sponsor a tragedy? Or get involved in even participating? So a lot of companies felt that for quite a number of years, this should just be a day when people individually within our organization decide for themselves how they want to observe it. Well, that would be fine, except that's not what the family members want. Okay, so direct from the horse's mouth, the families feel that that's the fastest way for the country to forget and for nothing good to ever come of the day. So if you really ever hear that, you should say, well, actually, the 9/11 community many years ago realized that we needed to make sure that it had to be something positive. And so we're really encouraging everybody to emphasize this idea of remember, but remember by doing. Don't just remember. And that's a key point. So it's okay to participate. It's safe. And as you can see from our site, we have no problem prominently featuring companies that have been contributors to us in a major, significant way. They themselves are doing things in store, in brand, at our, with our permission. And there's been absolutely no negative feedback, and the reason is because we're the 9/11 family community, and we're saying it's okay as long as they don't commercialize the day, which none of them are. They're very respectful to what's going on. This is something we know from the research. Ideally, if you can, give your employees a voice. So especially for 9/11, we like to say that, colleagues should have a voice and a choice. So if you can break it down into some groups that can make suggestions on what you can do. If you're a small organization and the train hasn't already left the station for 9/11, that's a good idea. Even if not, think about choice. Like if you've got a giving program, if you've got a volunteer project, don't just pick one thing or the other. Give people three things you can do. And please always include the opportunity for them to come to our site and choose for themselves, what they want to do. Pick a date that works for you. Observing 9/11 doesn't mean serving on 9/11. It doesn't mean that. It means observing. So that, what you want to do is consider what works for you. Like we have many companies that are kicking things up the week of 9/11. It's going all fall. They're doing lots of different things. We have our own projects on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and Monday. So it's not specifically limited to that day. Obviously, 9/11 is a Sunday this year. So, that's a good and a bad thing, depending upon your perspective from a company standpoint. This is something important. We've seen this working. A lot of companies do closed-end projects, which is they do projects just for their employees with the nonprofit. Well, a lot of that is driven by the nonprofits themselves, oftentimes wanting to show the impact of the donations that have been made to them by the company, and so they bring the company employees in to participate. But for this, it should sort of be the reverse, which is it would be nice if you picked a project and actually, if you don't already do it, invited people from throughout the community to participate with your employees side by side, so that it's not just a project that's closed to, say, the employees of XYZ company. It includes the employees and people within the community serving together to make a difference. That is a wonderful thing. And what's nice about that then is that the nonprofit on your behalf can then promote the project through press, and they can talk about it publicly, and for good reason, because they're recruiting. And so as a company, you get some recognition for the fact you're doing that, even though I know for many of you that would not be your goal. But still, nonetheless, doing it in public, or in part at the public event is a good idea. And if you do, be sure that your nonprofit working with you registers that into the VolunteerMatch database so that people can find it in your community. A couple of other things is that, align with whatever you're doing now. Again, it's a very powerful day to bring everyone together to support whatever your existing causes and initiatives happen to be. As I said before, let your employees do their own thing if they want. So if they can't take part in your activity, don't discourage them from submitting their own I Will pledges. We also have a drop-down menu of companies that have signed on to be quote-unquote participants. Now, that's not everybody, because we have, like I said, hundreds and hundreds of companies. But for those that are, that have contacted us and they've said, is there a way in which we can track the number of people from our company who are participating? We try to put them up there. we typically ask for a fairly small donation, but it's not a lot. And we can track, employee participation if that's of interest to you. The other thing is that oftentimes employees think about, working, but what about their skills? And I think all of you, probably becoming, all very sophisticated about the value of encouraging employees to give back using whatever special talents they have. Can they be a business mentor? If they're in the world of technology, what technological support could they offer to the nonprofit world? Again, you're already doing a lot of these things, so it's just a matter of sort of stepping that up for 9/11 and giving your employees an opportunity to pay tribute, because that's what they want to do anyway. A couple of other things that I think are important, sort of under the idea of following up and learning. This is what we do. I mean, obviously we're paying close attention to participation rates, where we can, volunteer hours, and stories about what people are doing. And we think that these are very important for companies to consider, particularly coming back after a project and merchandising them on their intranet or however they might do it, their newsletter. You should be able to really celebrate the active involvement of your employees in whatever you do for 9/11, and especially because of 9/11. And then, if it were me, I'd be doing some research after the fact, particularly if you get what you would consider to be a disproportionately large amount of participation, indicating that you've brought some new people into the process. Well, you should probably find out who some of those new people are, do some surveys, and maybe even some focus groups to understand what drew them into this particular day. What are they inclined to support in the future that isn't 9/11 related? In other words, what can you learn from this sort of group of so-called cause activists? Who are they? What is their age group? The degree that your company is permitted to do that internally, I think it would be helpful. I mean, we're certainly looking at it more and more every day, so that as we build our sort of MyGoodDeed community, which will be in the, more than 1 million by the time we're done with all of this, we'll be able to maybe better understand how we can get people who don't normally get engaged in service to participate in different types of projects. And we hope to share that research and data with the entire, employer community. So it's one of our big goals coming out of the 10-year anniversary. So that really is, in essence, the overall program. I hope I left enough time for everybody to answer a few questions. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Casey.
Thank you so much, David. You are just a wealth of information on this topic, and thank you very much for sharing all of your tips and the background of this, important day. We do have a couple of questions, and we have a little bit room for a couple more. So if you have any questions that haven't already been asked, please submit through the question box. David, the first question we had was about, a lot of organizations do their planning for volunteer events and different days of service at the beginning of the year. So what recommendations do you have for organizations who maybe haven't already built this into their strategic plan?
Yeah, well, the first thing I'd say is think about next year. So like I said, a lot of this isn't just about getting participation for 2011. It's about building awareness for the future. So if you're not able to do that much this year, that's fine. Totally understand. In fact, even some of our main, nonprofit partners are doing less this year with the intention of doing more in 2012 and beyond. So I would say do what you can do, and be, and we'll appreciate that. And of course, go to our site and register. Tell us what you're planning to do. Go and post a tribute on behalf of your organization saying, our company plans to do this, that, and the other. That way we can, like I said, we will never spam you, okay, and your data is completely confidential. But we can at least keep you informed about what's planned next year, and you'll start hearing from us probably by the tail end of the year. So I would say that. The other thing, though, is like I said, if you can't necessarily do anything, that doesn't mean that you can't play an important role in encouraging your individual employees to do something. And we already know that within our broad database of volunteer opportunities, there are more than 15,000 activities that are already in the system that relate to 9/11 or opportunities for people to participate around the 9/11 time frame. So if they just go to our website, they can search for it. Now, of course, many of you may also have the VolunteerMatch search capability built into your own intranet. You can go there, and because there are plenty of organizations there as well. The unique thing about also encouraging your employees to go to our website is that they can post tributes. they can post these simple 140-character statements about what they will do. And again, all that data is confidential. We don't share it. Nothing that they give to us is ever shared publicly. We don't sell it. So, we follow COPA compliance to the letter. So I would say just simply encourage people to go to the site, post their own plans, if that's all you can do this year. And that would be a huge help.
Awesome. So we have one other question that's specifically about messaging. Since we already talked a little bit about how, a best practice is to align this with the program that you already have for your organization. And this question is about, how do you build messaging around this day of service into their year-round campaign?
Sure. Well, it should always be, something that supports what you're planning to do. And so if you have a kind of a year-round campaign, I think, to me, I think 9/11 is an extraordinarily powerful catalyst to bring more people into the process, so that you can talk about, for example, if you, depending upon when you kick off your campaign, you could literally kick it off and have 9/11 be the kickoff, where people are signing up not just for what's happening around 9/11, but signing up for other sort of key signature moments. I'll give you an example. In New York, New York Cares, which has run our volunteer service projects there for nearly the past decade, they have a winter coat drive that's very successful. And one of the things that they encourage people to do as their tribute on 9/11 is to sign up for the winter coat drive in February. It's a great idea. People don't have to serve on 9/11. They can just make a pledge to commit to something. So it could always be about something in the future. So I think that's a valuable thing. The other thing I would suggest, too, is if you go to our 911day.org website, we have a section called Tools and Resources. You can get it right off the home page. And there's a business toolkit in there that's really valuable. It has a lot of great resources. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce helped provide that. And it offers a lot of tips and suggestions about different ways in which to approach this particular day. There's also another great toolkit in there entitled Remembrance, which is sort of how you address and talk about 9/11, the 9/11 victims in the context of your project and activity. Because we always like it if an organization begins their project by talking about why we're here. Why are we doing service on this day? What's it about? So you're trying to answer a question or two right out of the gate so that your employees understand the ritual and what we're essentially asking them to pass on to their children and their children.
Awesome. David, I have one more question that again is talking about sort of a sensitive subject for a lot of companies that kind of bridges all types of CSR efforts. This question is around, is it appropriate for companies to talk about what their efforts are with 9/11 Day? It's a sensitive day. Some people see talking about it as bragging, maybe about what they're doing to give back to their communities. So what kind of advice do you have in that sense?
Well, I think it depends on what the purpose is. Like, if you're doing a project with a nonprofit organization, and for example, you've made a decision that 20% of the volunteer slots will be made available to the general public, so you can work side by side with people in the community, then of course it's very suitable and appropriate to talk about that publicly. I tend to think that unless you're specifically participating in the program effort, for some reason, like you're a partner with us, where you're a recognized funder or partner of the 9/11 Day of Service and Remembrance, where what you're talking about is an aspect of our overall program, I would be careful about it, obviously, because if there's no purpose to announcing it other than to get attention that you're doing it, that's probably not the right way of doing it. But that said, if you come to our website and post your plans, we, on the other hand, are being asked by many media around the country to give them a list of what companies and organizations are doing. So we're putting together this huge resource list that is city by city by city, so that if I'm the reporter in Wichita or Houston or Dallas or Seattle, and I am looking for a way to write about the day, I got to find out about organizations that are doing things. So the way they're going to do that is they're going to check with a hands-on affiliate in that market first, but then they're also going to typically call us, which is what they always do. So if you tell us about your project, you can either register or just send us an email, and I'll give you that email in a second. We'll put it in our database list. We'll put it on the resource list. And again, I know you're not trying to do that to get attention, but you could actually add value to us if you told us. Because again, we got to tell these reporters what's happening. They're interested in talking to individuals and organizations that are doing stuff. So you actually serve a purpose by letting us, good purpose by letting us know. So you can send it to, it's simple, easy email to remember. It's info@911j.org. So just drop a note and say that you wanted to be added to the sort of the media resource list of organizations that will be participating in the projects, doing a 9/11 related project this year, or whatever your plans are. But also, don't forget, please go to the site, just the homepage, and register your tribute. So you can be sort of part of our quilt.
Okay, David, I have one more question for you, and then I'll take back over just to wrap things up. But the last program was, speaking about all those company programs that you see, was there any unique corporate effort that jumped out at you and that maybe broke the mold from what you expected that could inspire others?
I don't want to try to single anybody out, because I wouldn't say that there was anything that anybody did that was so uniquely special that I would want to say, wow, that's an example of something really great. I mean, I'm sure that when all is said and done and I go through the list, then I'll see some things that are particularly unique and important. I mean, right now we're still getting just a lot of that information in, but I don't know. I always have felt that when you're talking about good deeds, little deeds and big deeds, are equally important. So, and so that's why I really do believe that whatever you decide to do as an organization, even if it's very little, it's still really important and valuable in terms of its goal in supporting this day and promoting remembrance.
Well, great. Well, David, if you can just advance to the next slide for me. I just wanted to let everybody know, thank you so much for all the thoughtful questions that you brought today. If you'd like to stay informed on an ongoing basis about a lot of the efforts that David is doing and a lot of the other corporate efforts that are happening around 9/11 Day, I encourage you to follow our blog at volunteeringiscsr.org or follow us on Twitter at VM_solutions. VolunteerMatch is being part of this effort. We're going to have a lot of information being filtered through our network, so I encourage you to continue following us. And then finally, David, the next slide is just a reminder about our next webinar, which will be with Joe Waters, who's a blogger at selfishgiving.com and author of the new book, Cause Marketing for Dummies. He, in September, will be giving us a brief introduction and overview of cause marketing. What is it? What does this really look like for companies? So I encourage you to all sign up for that next webinar as well. And finally, David, I just want to thank you again for joining us today and, informing us about the efforts that MyGoodDeed has and all of your partnerships and, inspiring everybody on the call to get involved. So thank you so much for taking part today.
Well, thank you. It was a great opportunity. It was nice to meet everybody virtually by phone.
Great. Well, thanks to everybody for listening in, and we'll look forward to having you join us next time.